let's go ahead and finish off the reproductive system lecture. Actually, okay. No, don't do that. Go back. Hang on, give me a sec, guys. I want this, I want this. Everybody happy? Everybody not freaking out? Okay. All right, now let's talk about some of the processes that take place in the body for females. I'm going to go over here and start with oogenesis on the top right. Remember I said that for men, meiosis creates 4 sperm cells, all of which are used. In oogenesis, that's not the case. Women produce 1 large egg. The other 3 dissolve as things called polar bodies, okay? And polar bodies are simply cell copies that end up being discarded. There's a little bit more to it than that, but for an overview, this is great. That are discarded. Okay. All right, now let's look at ovulation. The ovulation, the egg is contained within the follicle. And then the follicle is going to become enlarged. When it does, it's known as the Graafian follicle, or as a Graafian follicle. Graafian, bug, Graafian follicle. And yes, there are 2 A's, G-R-A-A-F-I-A-N, Graafian follicle. That Graafian follicle is eventually going to rupture, okay? And the empty follicle becomes something called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum essentially becomes a gland where it's going to secrete progesterone and a little bit of estrogen. Okay. All right. So hormones of the ovarian cycle. We have the hypothalamus, which is going to release our gonadotropin releasing hormone, which you also find in males, if you recall. And that is going to do the same type of thing that it did in men, is that it's going to stimulates the anterior pituitary, where we're going to also have the release of follicle stimulating hormone, which is going to stimulate follicle growth. And the follicle is going to secrete estrogen. Follicle secretes estrogen. Okay. Hypothalamus, gonadotropin releasing hormone. That hormone acts on the anterior pituitary, causing it to release follicle stimulating hormone, which will allow the follicle to grow. And then it also, because the follicle develops, the follicle releases the estrogen. Okay. Then we have luteinizing hormone. In women, the luteinizing hormone is going to trigger ovulation, which is the release of the egg. And again, the ruptured follicle is going to become the corpus luteum. spelled that wrong. Come on. Nope, I'm gonna do it. There we go. Okay. So let's look at a full cycle. In the first 14 days, actually, how are they going to count it for this? Sorry, let me look at this map of this image for a second. Okay. So in the first 14 days, we have follicle stimulating hormone, which is going to cause the release of estrogen from the follicle, right? And we know that follicle stimulating hormone has been activated by the release of gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So this new surge in estrogen with this new follicle that's forming is going to have two effects. And those two effects are, it's going to turn around and stop the production of follicle stimulating hormone, because it's like, hey, the follicle has arrived. You don't need to stimulate the production for one anymore because I'm here. Okay, but not only is it going to stop the production of follicle stimulating hormone, it's going to say, done with that, but now we need to secrete the luteinizing hormone. Okay. Okay. Luteinizing hormone surge is going to trigger ovulation at day 14 of the cycle. All right. So first 14 days, we're going to produce follicle, release estrogen. Estrogen is going to say, stop producing follicles. I'm already here, but now we need to kick into the luteinizing hormone. And the luteinizing hormone is going to trigger the release of the egg from the follicle. Okay. So in the second half of this, these are 14-day periods. I mean, they have this split into 14 days each because a normal menstrual cycle for a woman is 28, but it can give or take. There's actually a decent range that's considered normal, but 28 days is kind of the standard. So it's broken into the first 14 and the last 14, okay? All right, so in the second part then, we know that luteinizing hormone is going to produce the corpus luteum because the follicle will rupture and after releasing the egg, we get the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum secretes mostly progesterone with a little bit of estrogen, and it is going to inhibit any more release of either follicle stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone, okay? This makes the endometrium thicken. We get an increase in vasculature or in blood vessels. This happens with the intention of supporting a pregnancy, okay? So the thickening endometrium with more blood vessels is going to be required if a fertilized egg is going to implant, okay? If, however, that doesn't happen, then the corpus luteum is going to basically start to shrink, okay? It's going to regress. And as it does, it decreases in the amount of it decreases the amount of progesterone that it's been secreting, okay? This causes vasoconstriction in the endometrium, because now we don't need all that extra vasculature. They're basically going to close off, okay? The extra ones. Causes vasoconstriction. And then all of those, how do I put it, cells that thickened the endometrium, right? They're going to slough off. And this is menstruation. Okay. So again, you have these changes happening in the endometrium with it becoming thicker and having a larger blood supply with the anticipation of having a fertilized egg implanted, okay? If that doesn't happen, then the corpus luteum begins to shrink, and that cuts back on how much progesterone is being released. And when that happens, we have vasoconstriction, okay? So those blood vessels are shrinking, closing off. As the blood supply decreases, the cells that were part of the thickened endometrium that the blood vessels were nourishing, again, they lose their blood supply, and so those extra cells slough off, and then you get menstruation. Okay. At that point, because progesterone is no longer being secreted, our follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone aren't being inhibited anymore, which lets the cycle reset. Follicle stimulated to develop, and it will eventually lead to ovulation. Okay. So if you look at, I like this one, at least for the way my brain pictures it. The other one's great too, because it shows what's happening with the follicles and everything. But if you look at this, you can kind of see these surges of hormone and then drop off of hormone when it comes to the estrogen and progesterone. Okay. Up here on this top one, we can look at like luteinizing hormone and some of what's going on there, and follicle stimulating hormone. But in this one, we see, so when you count a menstrual cycle, day one is considered the day that the woman's period starts, okay? So you start counting from the first day of bleeding. That's day one. And so then you have all of these things that we talked about here with follicle stimulating hormone, sending the message to develop a follicle, and then the follicle eventually telling, the hormone that it can stop, and then it triggers luteinizing hormone. Anyway, all of that's happening in this first 14. Okay, at which point we have ovulation, follicle releases the egg. Then you end up with the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone. Progesterone is going to say, stop producing FSH or LH, and wait and see if we get pregnant. Vasculature increases, endometrium thickens. And if no pregnancy has been detected around day 28 or so, then slowly the corpus luteum has been breaking down or regressing. Progesterone levels have been dropping off, which means that now we can start producing FSH and LH again, and we go back to another menstrual cycle. Doesn't that sound fun? And while FSH and LH are doing this, again, we can see what's happening with our estrogen and progesterone, how they both hit a peak at two different times. Estrogen kind of has a double peak you'll notice, whereas progesterone kind of has one that overlaps kind of the second peak. And then, so while all of this is happening as far as hormone production, hormone release, and while it's doing all of this stuff with, you know, follicles and egg release and blood vessels and endometrium lining, it also has all kinds of other effects. Some women experience them worse than others. The hormone surges have effects on other parts of the body, which can affect mood, behavior, all kinds of things. Some women get really bad headaches or migraines that are triggered by the hormone surges. There's so many things that this complex, constant soup of hormones create. All right. So we did what happens if pregnancy doesn't occur, but if it does, and a fertilized egg implants, then after about a week, let me move this out of the way. Kind of a week-ish following implantation. Got some more. We have the development of the placenta, which releases human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. Human chorionic gonadotropin. That's not. Don't you guys love how I have to like say this stuff phonetically while I'm writing it? HCG. HCG is what is discovered, what is looked for, what home pregnancy tests look for, is the presence of HCG. And so it reacts in the presence of HCG. And if there isn't any HCG present, then you get the negative response because chemically there was no reaction in the stick. Okay, so when we have the production of HCG, that is going to keep the progesterone levels continuously high. Remember that progesterone inhibits the production of follicle-stimulating hormone, or luteinizing hormone, and it also thickens the endometrium and brings in more blood vessels to supply that thickened endometrium. So obviously we need progesterone levels to stay higher during pregnancy so that we don't have a period cycle come on, because that can lead to miscarriage and other things you don't really want happening when you're pregnant. I've heard women say that they were pregnant but had what seemed like a period to them, sometimes for 6 months, and so they didn't realize that they were pregnant. I have to do a little bit of more research into that occurrence. It's not really, it shouldn't really be a true period, because those two conditions don't really go together, period and pregnancy, for the reasons we're looking at here when it comes to the hormone production. But I will look into that because I had somebody ask recently. Okay. How do vasectomies and birth control pills work? Birth control pills, this is just an example of one. This looks like it's a consistent dose, maybe of one hormone. But birth control pills use a combination, how do I put it? Some birth control uses a combination of both estrogen and progesterone to rigidly control, artificially, the production of hormone in the body. Okay, so we already know, based off of what we've just gone over, what estrogen and progesterone both do, and the inhibitory effects that they have on other hormones, the stimulating effects they have on the body. And so by regulating these hormones with a pill, you're telling your body how the cycle is going to go. Okay? You're telling it, this is how it's going to work. When you control the cycle like that, then you can create conditions hormonally in a female's body that won't allow pregnancy. Okay? Because the hormone mix is not correct. So you don't have the anatomical changes happening within the uterus to allow implantation and fertilization to take place. Okay? So it kind of makes sense. Control the hormones, you control what the hormones control, and prevent the circumstances of the environment from being right for pregnancy. There are some pills, again, that are one type of hormone. Some are a combination of both. Some have varying doses. Some have one consistent dose. For women, it can be a fun game to try to figure out which combination, if any, is right, which hormone is right, which dosage is right, if you stay on a consistent, if you do the changing. And sometimes as you get older and your body changes and hormones change, especially after you have kids, kind of which birth controls work better can change. Because again, with hormone regulation, you're not just controlling the physical cycles, but it also can affect mood swings, sex drive, emotions. It has physical symptoms. It can cause, like people with autoimmune disorders, you can deal with inflammation, headaches. You can be nauseous, just all kinds of fun things when it comes to birth control. Let me say that again, all kinds of fun things when it comes to hormone method birth control. So even things like patches and stuff like that, all are going to function the same way. That's how birth control pills work, or patches, or anything that's a hormone-based birth control, usually taken by women or used by women. For men, there is the possibility or the option of having a vasectomy, which is generally a quick, often reversible process that's usually done in office. But basically what they do is they seal off the vas deferens. Let me see if they're going to show. There we go. So we have the vas deferens here, which, if you remember last lecture, is where semen, matured semen is stored and where it will be released from during ejaculation. They cut those off right there, okay? Cut them off, which means everything else is functioning like it's supposed to, but the semen has no way to be released because the tube that connects it up to the urethra, or actually the sperm, not the semen, the sperm is not released because the tube that connects it has been cut in half. Okay, so you essentially still get semen in ejaculation, but there's no sperm in the semen. Make sense? What else was I going to say about that? And again, sometimes that can be reversed by reattaching the two ends of the cut vas deferens. Okay? That's it. I think that was all I was going to say. Yeah, everything else continues like normal, except no sperm is mixed in with the semen. I think that's our last page. Yes, it was. All right, guys, did good. Speaking of headaches and Coke, I need one. I mean, I don't need a headache. I mean, I have a headache. So maybe I should try some caffeine. You ever get where it's just like behind one eye? It's just behind my right eye. And I hate that because then it always makes me nauseous. It's not supposed to be classically a migraine, but I go through times where I get them frequently enough that I'm just constantly low-level nauseous with a constant nagging headache. Anybody relate? Anyone relate to that? Or is it just me rambling as usual? Okay, see you soon.